Welcome back. So today we do a really quick chat on KZ's AM16. This isn't the full review. I've only had it for a couple days. And I originally thought about it as in here are all the things that KZ got right with AM16, kind of a change from the past on their all balanced amateur sets, but maybe a little bit more general. But I do want to talk about the size of them. And I think the size of their all balanced armature sets and even some of their hybrids, that has always been an issue. And when we look at it, I think the faceplate looks very similar to Zenith, but no, the sizes aren't quite the same. This one is more of the full-size KZ shell. This is Zenith. This is kind of the single dynamic driver size shell. So that one is quite a bit smaller. When we look at it next to an AS24, maybe that's a Pro, I don't remember which one it is. So I think this one is actually a little smaller than the original large size shell that they've used in the past. I think they've maybe shrunk down some of the balanced armatures. I think this one is just a little bit, it's kind of hard to see it. I think this one, AM16, is a little bit smaller than that one, not by a significant amount, but pretty close. Hydro, I think it's probably the same exact size as Hydro. I mean, without measuring it, I would say it's probably about the same size. And I think it's the same nozzle as well. So those of you who had trouble fitting Hydro, you may have a little trouble fitting AM16. But yeah, I think that is one of those things that KZ still needs to continue to work on, is to get these down to just, I don't know. This one's actually a pretty good size. I think it feels a little better than Hydro or AS24, but not quite Zenith fit. But anyway, let's kind of jump into it. And yesterday, someone kind of caught me off guard. Mr. Flying Weasel said, "Hey, does this thing sound like Variations?" And I didn't even think about Variations. Variations was pretty far from my mind when I heard AM16. But if you align the graphs, they actually are very, very close. But I will kind of say right off the bat, no, that it doesn't really sound like Variations at all. And if you've heard Variations, you know it is a very much an upper range set. They have a lot of energy in the balanced armatures and the ESTs, and they kind of dip out the mid bass, and that gives you a very upper range sounding set. You know, very technical, very, very nice set, but very much concentrated out here. AM16 is different, and I tried to align these graphs to give you kind of more of a hint to that kind of sound, but I would say the treble is more relaxed than Variations, and that just kind of takes away the emphasis from the upper range, and it shifts it down into here. And again, what you're not going to get on the graph is that the balanced armature base units that they used, they're kind of a little bit more present than what you're expecting. And shifting this balance down a little bit here, relaxing the treble a little bit, kind of makes this mid-bass tuck go away as well. So there's definitely more presence. They didn't need to boost the sub-bass to kind of roll that off in the way that they should. This becomes more of a thumpier mid-bass, which I wasn't expecting. So yeah, this whole thing may graph like Variations, but sound-wise, they're almost the opposite. Variations is very much out here, and AM16 is going to sound a little thicker, a little bit fuller, a little bit more musical, kind of down in the lower range. So I'll say no, AM16 isn't a cheap Variations, and I tried to align the graphs to make it kind of the more like how it sounds. On AM16, the lower range is more present. Variations is the upper. The balance on AM16 is just subtly shifted lower with that lower treble. But there's two kind of bonuses to it. As I said, the mid-bass tuck is just a little bit less present on AM16. It sounds a little bit fuller down there compared to Variations, which has this tuck, but then has a little bit more emphasis out there. So the whole thing sounds a little bit brighter and a little bit cleaner down there. And I think that's kind of fine. It's just two different sounds, but just looking at the graph, it's really hard to see that. There's also a 5K dip here, maybe from Let's Shure's DX1. Maybe and I said the same thing about Let's Shure DX1. They actually dipped that one down probably a little bit too much. It lost a little bit of presence. KZ is a little bit of a shallower dip, but it accomplishes the same idea. You lose that bright spot. You lose that point that kind of draws your attention to the upper range, and the whole thing sounds a little bit more natural, but it is a little bit more relaxed, and that is going to shift the balance a little bit down to the lower range. And so yeah, the 7K pop. So I think they dipped the 5K and then popped the 7K, and you're not going to be able to see the 7K pop on these, but go look at the KZ graph and you can kind of see it. So they kind of dip out one bright spot and then poke in kind of the secret, a little bit more detail into 7K, and to kind of accomplish the same thing without people who, like me, who are more sensitive to 5K. You don't hear that, but you kind of get the sense of more detail or more micro details or more sharpness from a little bit of 7K. And again, like lowering the sub bass here, the way AM16 does it in the red, that's fine. It just gives you a thumpier, sharper, more defined style mid bass. That's exactly what I would prefer. And on a BA with the kind of the speed of a BA and the less, moving air, that from a dynamic driver perspective, the way BAs do their bass curves, I think that was actually a good move. And then to complete the relaxed treble, there's no air boost out here. Even you can kind of see that one on variations. But I think we saw this first on Zenith. The way this red line tracks the Harman target and it goes straight down. It doesn't really pop off and extend into and give you a little bit of extra air. There's no boost there. Again, this is just going to kind of complete and I say the same thing on ear acoustics. It doesn't draw the sound. It doesn't draw the balance out that way. It essentially pulls it in this way, and that gives AM16 and Zenith and ear acoustics, SPA, gives all of those sets kind of the same effect of moving it, kind of a more thicker, fuller style sound, and that's exactly what happens on AM16 as well. So what is AM16? This is the KZ all BA set that probably most fans have been waiting for. It's affordable at $57. It sounds fun and musical, but it still has some BA tech to sound clear. But, I do want to say that this one is probably more of a fun musical set. This one goes back probably more to KZ's roots, not necessarily in their all BA sets, but their roots as far as having a fun, engaging sound and kind of a more lower centric, a fun, bassy sound. That's kind of where they started. That is more along the lines of where AM16 is. That isn't really where AS24 was. Probably not where AS16 was. Definitely not where Sonata was. So when I say that this one is probably for most fans, I think it's more for those KZ fans who are looking for a KZ style sound, but done in all balanced armatures, as opposed to people who are looking for really high-end, really technical balanced armature sets. Those are more along the lines of Sonata and AS24. This is for people who just want to try an all BA, who are really used to KZ sound signature and want something that is fun, a little bassy, a little thicker, more musical, that, essentially just a more fun set. And I would say in the past, KZ would often try to show off their driver performance in our all BA sets. They'd use bigger V shapes, more treble, more air. It was kind of more of everything. And those are the sets that ship with foam. Not all the ones that ship with foam were in that style, but they would kind of hang out the upper treble way out there, and they would look at it and say, look, our drivers perform just as well as everything else. More expensive sets, they're reaching 40 kilohertz. There was a bunch of things there that they were trying to show off technical capability, but lost a little bit of that fun and musicality. And AM16 and Zenith were sort of a return back to where KZ was and bringing back a sound that is more fun, more engaging, but still does perform quite well. And that's sort of how I would describe AM16. So AM16 does show restraint similar to Zenith. It's tuned similar. It sounds thicker, less technical, but all the details are still there. But you do need more volume, and this is more musical than tech show-off, as I said. But why is it important on AM16? Kind of one of the things that KZ would have complaints on in the past when they tried to show off and have a lot of treble level was BA timbre, right? So the BAs that KZ used probably weren't the best at tons of upper range energy. They just sounded a little bit off and a little bit less natural. So to pull all of that back in the way that Zenith does and the way that AM16 does, the BA timbre, there's a real lack of it on this set. It's really not noticeable. It's not perfect, but just getting rid of all of that extra energy that they've used in the past, it sounds way more natural than you're going to expect at $57. And second, the BA bass drivers that they used, again, that just kind of the natural bit that you get out of BA bass drivers, their speed and their lack of persistence just work here. It avoided the need to overboost the treble over the bass. Just let the BAs do their thing, much like Zenith, it sounds balanced. There was no need to add a bunch of extra energy out there to force detail in front. Maybe they did with the 7K, but it's pretty minor. But just generally letting the BA sound kind of natural in the way that they should without a real need to overboost anything is kind of a change from their previous balanced armature sets. And again, kind of AS24 style, there was some boost there. Zenith is really the one that sort of refined this style of tuning, where you're not going to have a lot of upper treble boost to add a bunch of fake air out there to make it sound super detailed, but really have a natural kind of roll off in the treble in the way that it follows the Harman target. So, but again, I'll say much like Zenith, much like Ear Acoustics, SPA, and other sets where the 10 to 20 basically follows the Harman target without any extra boost, these sets are going to require more volume to sound bigger, to sound more detailed, to get the upper treble contribution to the mids. And again, I think that was one of the things I talked about with Zenith. It's a little bit hard to listen to that set at lower volume. It doesn't make as much sense or sound as full and detailed and high end as it does at lower volume, because you're not getting a whole lot of boost out here, and there's not a whole lot of contribution at lower volume. But when AM16 and Zenith, when you turn those sets up, SPA, Ear Acoustics SPA is actually the same thing. The SPA model actually has almost the same exact following the Harman target upper treble that you see on AM16. They all need that little bit of extra volume to sound bigger and fuller and more detailed and more resolved. At lower volume, that you don't quite get that. So why is it important to have that 3K peak here? KZ tends to use one that's probably 2.5. Their sets, I've talked about recently that we're at 2K. All of those things, all those sets have the same problem. You can't really volume scale. So 3K is sort of the point at which you could really turn them. They can turn them up in volume to hear everything out here, but not get the shoutiness that you're going to get at 2.5 or even 2. And some brands try to rise a little bit lower, then cut over. But what tends to sound, I think, more natural to most people is doing what Variations does exactly, is you rise right at 3K a little bit later and you avoid all of that front end shout, but you still get the energy and a really nice natural vocal. So there you go. There's some random things that I think that KZ actually got right on AM16, and I will do another review of it, but I just wanted to kind of get these things out of the way, as it's actually a cool sounding set. It kind of caught me off guard on two accounts, and I wasn't expecting it to sound the way it does, but glad it does. And again, I will say that those of you who have heard Zenith, you'll probably have a good idea of what AM16 actually sounds like, and sort of their slant on what an LBA set should sound like. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.